Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, our In the News articles are back. Julie and I will discuss an article from Inside Higher Ed. The article is by Knox, and it is entitled Higher Ed's Antitrust Problem. For a question from a listener, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College is back 2 weeks in a row. And we're answering a question from a mom from New York. And she wants to know, do you have any tips for my student when colleges visit her high school to do information sessions and talk with students? I thought Hillary would be great for that because she's out doing those visits this fall. Final part of Jay Rosner's interview. But we move away from tips from the SAT and the ACT and just discuss a range of issues, including no harm testing policies schools are adopting. And Jay gives us an insider's view on how the University of California adopted their position on test-free college admissions. Finally, we close with the final part of Lynda and Lisa discussing Lynda's recent visit to Colorado State University. Friends, on Monday's episode, we told you that the application for College Counselors Confab should be up by Thursday. Well, that application went up on yourcollegeboundkid.com Tuesday, 2 days ago. College Counselors Confab is a professional development opportunity for a diverse group of college counselors to have a monthly 1-hour Zoom meeting to strengthen each other's skills and to provide a supportive, empathetic, and confidential community. And we have different types of counselors. We have public school counselors, independent school counselors, community-based organization counselors, and ICs, or independent college counselors. And we meet monthly. And if you're a college counselor and you think being a part of a community like this will help you to serve your students better and help provide the skills and supportive community you're looking for by partnering with a group of professionals, go ahead and complete the application to join College Counselors Confab by going to yourcollegeboundkid.com, clicking the Resources tab, and completing the application.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Okay, Julia, we're back with another article, and this one is probably even more, complex than the last one we discussed.
Yes.
And so it's good timing because Susan and I recently discussed this on a Monday episode, and it has to, so the article is called Higher Ed's Antitrust Problem. It's also Inside Higher Ed, like the last one was. It's by Knox. I won't read the whole thing because it's a little longer, but it's talking about a lawsuit against 40 universities and the College Board, and they're being accused of colluding to inflate tuition. And it's a complaint that's being brought by a Boston University student and a Cornell University alumni that are alleging that private institutions, the ones named in the agreement, they agreed to require the non-custodial parent profile for their institution, and by doing that, you're opening up the other parent to have to submit all their finances, and therefore they limited the ability of that student or family to get money for the college. They would say they artificially raised the tuition and lowered eligibility. Now, the interesting thing is there was just a settlement for 17 institutions in 2022, highly selective, a price-fixing antitrust lawsuit that was won. I didn't think that thing was going to be won. And 10 of those institutions have already settled for $248 million. That was in 2022. Now, Susan and I talked about the case from the 80s that ended up not getting settled until 1994 that ruled against colleges being able to agree to a common standard price. And that was done so that people would make decisions based on money, but it was seen as limiting people's financial freedom. I have some strong thoughts on this. One. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm happy to also have you go first on. I even said I got into college admissions in 2008, right? So I had actually never really investigated the genesis of the non-custodial CSS profile. And like Mark, it's like the bane of my existence. Well, I don't feel good about the CSS profile in a lot of ways. But you and I have worked with students where we select schools that don't require the non-custodial CSS profile, or maybe look at the non-custodial parent differently. And so I hadn't really thought about, I just accepted it as this is how financial aid works at generous institutions that are partners. Well, I'll say this, I'm not really aware of, there's some lovely merit awarding colleges, but I'm not really aware of generous need-based awarding colleges that are private that aren't a CSS profile partner. How about that?
Sure.
But I hadn't really investigated the genesis of this. And I think most people on this podcast know, but I'm literally not married to my partner. We've been together for 9 years because of the CSS profile non-custodial bit. Like, that is why we're not married. Is so that in case his daughter would like to go to college, my finances are not factored in because she would have a very different look. So I'm happy to let you go, and I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Let me start by giving a little bit of background, because I always talk about trying to want to have podcasts that are interesting to someone 45 years in the profession, but also a brand new person just arrived from another country. And I feel like we might be talking over some people's heads on this. So I'm just going to start with the basics for a sec. So there's two financial forms that are oftentimes required. FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. You need that to get federal money. There's a group of highly selective institutions, wealthier, around 200 of them, that require the college scholarship search profile. And it's much, much more comprehensive, invasive look into your finances. It's basically been set up in a way that you can't hide any money at all with the CSS profile. There's a lot of ways, if somebody really knows the FAFSA, they could coach somebody around hiding money with the FAFSA. But you can't with the profile is completely bulletproof. It really is. Like, financial aid directors have gotten together, they've seen any scam or any way someone's hid money over the years, and they've added a question to prevent anybody from being able to hide money. I mean, it even asks stuff that has nothing to do at all with the student aid index that they generate, just to get a picture of your financial profile.
Yeah.
For example, it asks how much money you expect to make next year, and cars that you drive, and and it asks about your retirement accounts. Now, those things are even part of the formula, but they're trying to get a sense of your financial picture.
Right.
So one of the big differences between the CSS profile and the FAFSA only asks for one parent to fill out the financial information. The profile gives colleges an option to require a non-custodial parent also fill it out. So this is gonna, surprise you, but so this applies to not just married families. So it applies to, it applies to never marrieds. It applies to separated. It applies to divorced, and it applies to people that live together. All of them are included with the CSS profile. And the rationale being, I'm not going to let you present a picture to us of $70,000 income for one parent when there's another parent out there making 400 plus, and we don't even see their finances. And I've seen this happen many times in my college career. And I'm working to help the family. So when I have that situation, I'll coach them because my agency is with the family. I'm going to either direct them to schools that only ask for the FAFSA or schools that don't ask for the non-custodial parent profile. Julia, one of the families you and I jointly worked with together was a family where we had to direct to a school that required the profile, but not the non-custodial parent profile. I'm not sure if you remember that, but it was like 7 years ago, and it ended up saving them over $60,000 a year. However, I totally understand why schools require the non-custodial parent profile.
Yep.
I have several people in mind right now who I've worked for that were able to hide over $400,000 income because they were able to make it invisible.
Right.
And I really don't feel that was fair. That is not the same as a single mom or even a modest resource to income family making $90,000 or $70,000. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Because they have this whole access to this whole other bunch of money out there. So to me, in looking at this lawsuit, I thought it was completely bogus. Completely bogus. Because I feel like colleges have a right to not have people get over on them and hide money like that. Plus, in addition to that, one of the things the lawsuit even talked about was how the colleges made exceptions for different people and didn't and they make it sound like they played favorites, and sometimes they waived it and sometimes they didn't. Well, that's what you're supposed to do if you're humane, because what you're supposed to do is, and I've talked about this in the past, you're supposed to make a judgment. You're differentiating between willing and able. Like a listener sent in a question when I first talked about this. Well, am I screwed? Because I literally, and I can't remember the particulars of the question, but the way they described it, there was no access to their parent. So are you literally going to tell me that they're going to make my kid have to produce a parent? And there's always been exceptions to this.
Yes.
There's exceptions. Now, it gets subjective because some things are clear, right? Like you don't know where they are. Okay. They're in prison. Those things are like really clear. But it gets a lot more gray in certain situations.
Yes.
Is the person paying child support? How often do you see that? Like, I don't want to go too much in detail, but the point is, to me, what happens is once people win a lawsuit, then you bring a whole lot more. That's why we knew with affirmative action, it was inevitable there were going to be more lawsuits that were going to get brought because they had success.
Right.
And that's how I feel about this. To me, this is like a frivolous lawsuit. There's quotes in the article from the attorneys that feel very, very confident that it will be found to be frivolous. Because if I look at it from a school standpoint, so if you don't require the profile, you have to realize word can just get on the street. All you have to do is say, I'm not paying.
Yeah.
And then the school, doesn't make you pay. And then everybody hides hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then how are you going to pay your bills? And it's also not equitable.
Right.
The form is a pain. And it's a pain, especially to under-resourced families, because a lot of people don't end up actually completing it correctly if they're not getting proper guidance. And I respect the fact that QuestBridge used all of their leverage to basically create their own waiver form, which is much, much more generous because so many of their families have those unique circumstances where, like it can get gray. A lot of times you have to have the high school counselor sign off that the parent is not involved. And a lot of times you can get a waiver, and schools are different because it's a judgment call as to how strict or how lenient they are. But I didn't see any basis for this lawsuit, Julia, like looking at it.
So I'm glad you said that, because I was kind of reading this being like, I thought that's the whole point of institutional methodology, is that whether I like it or not, a college is well within their right to say, hey, you know what, take away even the non-custodial thing. They're every college might treat medical debt differently. Correct. Or home equity differently. Correct. And it is meant to be that, I have had students who might have the same exact financial background, but they have something a little different in their context. A parent that never contributed to child support, but they can contact them, right? Or so to me, it's always been a case by case basis, and part of the non-custodial thing also does work in the favor of less resource people, where I've had, that way it can be shown like, hey, I don't get support from this other parent, or like, I don't know how to find this parent, or we have a lot of medical debt, or my other parent is actually caring for their grandmother that I never see, or something like that. So to me, I didn't see why this was an issue. I guess to me, the only interesting piece about this was that if it's true that College Board in 2006, when the genesis of the CSS profile tried to, really tie people to college's arms and say, you will be using this. But I also don't find that to have merit given the amount of partners of the CSS profile that don't require the non-custodial waiver. And again, it comes down to institutional methodology, which also I'm not even sure institutional methodology is consistent within the own institution anyways, right? Like, it's always been contextual for me. And I'm not saying that's fair or consistent or transparent, but I just didn't see where this is different than any other issue in institutional
I
methodology.
completely agree. And that's why when I talked with Aaron Wolf on 18 reasons why college financial aids are all over the place, this was one of the 18 reasons that schools have different policies on how they handle non-custodial. And I don't see any way that you could legislate this, because what happens is, you just have so many unique circumstances that come up that just require an independent judgment call.
Yeah,
There's
totally.
no way that I can see how you could just legislate one, so they have the principle. We're differentiating between willingness versus able. And then the financial aid office does their best to discern, is this a parent who is able but not willing, or are they just not able to do it? And there can be lots of reasons why they're not able. I mentioned a couple. You have no idea where they are, imprisonment, physically incapacitated. You can get a waiver for this because it falls under the category of not able. Remember, the standard is, are you able, not are you willing to pay? And if you heard my interview with Aaron Wolf, you saw her heart, and you saw how she just wants to help families with the resources that Bucknell has. And it's my experience when it comes to financial aid people that that's just what they want to do. They're in the business of helping kids, helping students. And sometimes I hear people who've never met a financial aid director or officer or haven't interacted with maybe anyone at all, and they kind of describe the profession in a slimy way. They sort of present it as, well, they're just trying to suck as much money out of your pocket so that the college can have more money. And I can honestly say I've never ever met a financial aid officer, not even one time, that thinks that way. I still think the job pays enough to attract people of that mindset. They're just in it to help kids and help families. A lot of times, if you can document a past track record of the over time of the person completely dropping the ball. Like, I've been involved in winning a lot of these, winning from a standpoint of like advising somebody how to do an appeal, and they've won.
Yep.
And a lot of times we have to document, have to go to the school counselor. You have to show a track record that they have dropped the ball over and over and over again. One of the big things they'll look at is child support right away. Are you getting it or not getting it? But there's a lot of very, very complicated, unique cases that you just can't just come up with a policy other than, okay, willingness versus able, and then each school come up with their policy individually. And there are some schools like Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, that don't require it. They require the profile. Mm-hmm. There are a few schools that do that, apply to them if you're in that case. But the plaintiffs, they were making the case that you're hindering my ability to get money because you're requiring it, or you're selectively administering it by requiring it of some and not others. But the nature of it is going to have, sometimes it's going to be required and sometimes it's not, because sometimes the person really is refusing to pay, and then sometimes they really are not able to.
Right. And in my experience, I don't know about you, and this is where it is really heartbreaking, is most of the time I am proving through the non-custodial waiver that the child is not financially supported by the other parent. It's so that's really heartbreaking and tough. And we can do that because I'm a college counselor at a well-resourced school. I don't honestly know how the average person gets through that process, but I would say that, they make you jump through hoops to prove that you don't get money from the other person. So it really is, to as much as I don't like that process, it really does safeguard from people being able to hide money, and people who have, they're going to find any money you have, as you said. So
Now, here's what I will say, Julia. I have seen some schools that I think are so strict
yeah.
in their unwillingness to ever give a waiver
Yes.
that they are so insensitive to families that are not two parent households,
Yes.
whether like never married, separated, divorced, and they're just functioning off of a mindset where they're so out of touch. And that and like the kid is literally doing everything to show, I'm not trying to get over on you. Like there is either a long track record of not providing financial support, or I really cannot locate where they are. And then the schools.
Yes.
So that, I think, on an individual basis, those schools need a slap on the wrist, or we need to like call them out or whatever. But that's different than what this is. This is
Yes.
going after the principle of even requiring it. They're saying is decreasing my ability to get aid because it's bringing that other person in. Or they're saying schools are selectively making waivers here and there. And I just think I will be flabbergasted if they lose this lawsuit. I think this is just a couple people, and they've looked at the fact that there have been some past rulings that ruled against colleges, and somebody didn't like it, and some lawyers said, let's maybe they'll settle and we'll get a lot of money or something.
Right. More often than not, those who are deserving of need-based aid will get more financial aid by completing the CSS profile.
Yeah, because the profile, the only schools that have the profile, like you alluded to this, they're only schools that give away a significant amount of need-based aid. So that's why it's
right. They're generous schools.
Yeah, that's why there's so few public schools, because there's so few public schools that have generous need-based aid to give away. And a lot of times when they do, it's for their own state. So if you look at those 200 plus schools, there's like 7 schools that are public on there. And some of them, not all the ones that are public even require the non-custodial parent profile. Sometimes they just want the more accurate read from filling out the forms, because it is a more accurate form, even without the non-custodial.
It is.
Yeah, and so the whole purpose of that is so that their precious need-based aid that donors have given over centuries in some cases can actually go to the people that deserve it, not to someone that scammed them.
Right, exactly. I always say every time, I'm sure Mark, you feel the same way, every time I tell the family and prepare the family that we're going to have to fill out the CSS profile, and I'm talking about, middle to low income families. So of course this starts to get really very scary, nerve wracking. How am I going to find my documentation? It's very hard to complete. And I say to them, the best thing I can tell you is that, I'll quote Amy Kirkcaldy, my old colleague.
Like Amy.
She would say, you might take 2 hours to do the CSS profile, and you might fight, you might throw things across the room, but in 2 hours that might yield $15,000 more of need-based aid, if not more. That's a pretty good hourly rate, right? Is it worth it to take that job on? Yeah, I think it is. So as much as it's not right, and it's not easy or accessible, like, it is designed to provide a more accurate need-based package for you.
Julia, you mentioned that you may be eligible for another $15,000. That's $15K per year. Now, assuming your income and assets stay fairly constant, that's $60,000 over 4 years. And remember, that's after tax money. So depending on the state you're coming from, you could be talking about $100,000 of pre-tax money that you're leaving on the table. Yeah, I mean, I really would like to see colleges, and some do this and some don't, like really assign families to, this is your person. Yeah. And then that person on the financial aid side, and then that financial aid person being willing to really take time, like an hour maybe.
Yes.
To help, because that profile is brutal. It is so easy to make a mistake. It is so easy to not know. And we usually share resources out here. MIFA always has great, walkthrough videos they do every year, and other organizations as well. But if you're not having somebody guide you, and don't be a business owner, because it can take 5 hours. You have to literally document every expense that's over $1,000 for some school, then you have to do something called IDoc, because for the FAFSA, the FAFSA is synced to the IRS, so you can just upload tax returns. But this is not synced to the IRS. So now you have to have a way of uploading tax returns. And so there's something called IDoc, which is another CSS profile product. And that allows you to at least do it once and not have to go through that whole process if you have like 5 or 6 CSS profile schools. But that's complicated. But I understand it because people's finances are complicated. So if you're trying to ensure fairness, it isn't going to be a simple form. So I wish schools would like really have a designated person that could really handhold, because not everybody is working with someone like you or me. And this can be incredibly fraught with error, and is so much potential for error. And it's really, I am sympathetic to people that are like, I'm just completely overwhelmed by this.
Yes, totally. I had a parent recently who just put in the wrong date and they had to redo the entire profile. College Board couldn't just go in and switch the date. Or I had a financial advisor recently completed, and he had a question about, he's a financial advisor, and he had a question about one particular question on CSS profile. Called College Board, he got 3 different answers from 3 different employees there. So it's no bueno.
I know. Well, thank you, Julia. It's fun.
No,
always great as always.
Stay mad, everyone.
Yeah. we'll find our next article will be more inspiring and uplifting. I feel like our last 2 were ones where we were, typing a lot. Yeah, money. Awesome.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, friends. Hillary's back. Of course she's back after that question from last week. So we have another anonymous mom, and I'm going to play the question from anonymous mom and get Hillary's thoughts.
Hi, I'm a mom of a junior from a highly resourced public school in the Metro New York suburbs. I'm a longtime listener of your podcast and really appreciate what you guys do for the college newbie parents like myself. School has just started, and we are beginning to be notified about colleges coming to our high school for visits. These aren't the big college fair type events that I remember when I went to school many years ago, but rather seem to be smaller 30-minute sessions with individual colleges during the school day that students can register to attend. I'm guessing they're fairly similar to what you might get at an info session from a campus visit. Our school opens these visits up to both juniors and seniors. And in the communication we have received from the college counselor, it was definitely implied that seniors should use these visits to get to know the admissions officer, as they're likely going to be the ones reading their applications. Can you shed some light on these visits? My shy junior student is definitely not the type to go up and schmooze with an admissions rep. And I realize as a junior, there's a bit less pressure, but just curious how one should approach these visits. Thanks so much.
Yeah, where do you want to go with this one, Hillary?
Yeah, I would say that your students should never feel like they have to schmooze with an admission rep. We do get that from lots of students, but it's really not, it's not required, right? This is not a required part of the college admission process. And sometimes we as admission officers don't enjoy that either, because it sometimes feels kind of fake. So rather than thinking about the high school visit as an opportunity for schmoozing or even like getting to know the rep on another level, I would say that the high school visit is an opportunity to get to know the college better and to really be able to ask questions, to dig into what makes the college special, what might make it a good fit for you. And it's hard to access your college rep in other situations. Like you go to a college fair and you're sometimes rushed. There are a lot of other students around. It's noisy. You just can't have those kinds of conversations. When you come to campus, you can't necessarily meet with your college rep. We are doing other things during the workday, and we don't always have time to meet with students who are here to visit campus unless we are the director who's in charge of meeting with students that day, right? So I would think of the high school visit as a really neat opportunity to get to know the college better, and to find out what could make it a good fit for you. So sometimes at the high school visits that I have really interesting conversations where a small group of students, maybe 5 or 6, will sit there and ask me really hard questions sometimes about Colorado College and about, our commitment to anti-racism, or about our commitment to wellness, or different things that make us who we are. And I love having those conversations. And it's not necessarily because I get to know each of the students individually, but because we're able to dig in a little bit beyond what you would hear at a typical info session, or what you would find on the website. So that's why I encourage students to go to high school visits, because it really goes more in depth than what you can get in most other settings.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, and I want to go into some of it with what you said. But implication is not attending could be a missed opportunity, potentially,
Absolutely.
to one, get to know the school more. And you don't have to do the schmooze thing, but asking good questions can always make somebody stand out. Coming even with one question that you can't find an answer to that's important to you.
Or like as you're sitting there listening to the conversation, offering follow-up questions, right?
Mhm.
Just because you're by nature a curious person and someone else in the small group asks a question that sort of piques an interest in something, and you don't have to speak up, but you should feel comfortable asking those questions. And most of the time, I'm not going to remember who you are. I'm not going to remember your name from that. And so it should feel like a place where you can ask the questions you want to ask without fear that there's going to be some, sort of, I don't know, like that it's going to affect your admission, because most of the time it's not going to, unless you really like stand out as someone who is rude. Then perhaps I will remember your name.
I feel there's a story there. No, it's a unique opportunity. I shared the information at once. It was data from Dartmouth, a book I often like to quote called Valedictorians at the Gate. But in that book, Becky talked about she has New Jersey as her territory, and that's the state she's from. And they visit less than 7% of the schools in the state. So these decisions are not made eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Like they're intentional, right? Like you're planning, and you're either going to places.
I mean,
where
they are intentional. And also sometimes it's like, gosh, I have this, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock
Sure.
spot open. Where can I get a quick visit in? And maybe it's a school you've never been to before.
Sure.
Maybe it's one that you're excited to visit. Like, so yes, they are often very intentional. And sometimes it's like throwing darts at a
No, that's a really
board.
good point, right? Somebody canceled on me. I have a time opened up. Oh, there's a school in the area. Let me check it out. So that's really important to mention that. But most of the time, planning goes into them, and it could be like both sides of the spectrum. It could be, okay, this is a traditional feeder. We know we get a lot of kids from here, so we're likely to get applications here. So this is a priority school for us. Or it could be a school that we think might have potential for whatever reason, and we'd like to try it and take a couple visits maybe for a few years and see if we can drum up apps. But
sometimes it's also about like, do students show up to these visits? Like I just finished my travel in Boston, and there were feeder schools there that we visit every year because we get so many applications from them, where I went and I had 0 students come to the high school visit. And I know that I'm going to get at least 6 or 7 applications from that school. And I'm probably not going to visit those schools again next year, because it just feels like sort of a waste of time. So it's not because I'm not going to admit students from that school, but just like I should be sort of broadening the schools that I visit and going to places where students actually need to sit down and talk with me. So it's not a judgment of the school if we don't show up. Sometimes it's just based on past experience. We don't end up having conversations with students at that school. And so it's not a good use of our time to visit, but it doesn't affect how we admit or don't admit from that school.
Sure. And kids are extremely busy. And they might have a conflict with something else, and all those kinds of things. Some schools also have strict policies on juniors and whether juniors can miss class to do sessions. There's a lot of factors. What I'm struggling to communicate here, Hillary, can help me with this. On the one hand, I'm really glad you said what you said, and I was hoping you would say this actually when I was thinking about this question, which is most of the time I'm not going to remember, because I don't want people to feel a certain kind of pressure, almost like they may feel on like a one-on-one interview or something, that somebody feels like, oh, of course they're going to remember I had a one-on-one interview. I don't want people to feel that kind of pressure. But on the other hand, I can think of instances when I've been on both sides, both when I was traveling in admissions and I would do these group sessions, as well as both when I was at Westtown and reps like you were coming in, and I would take it, and help Susan out and cover for always in the South Room. We always did this in this room called the South Room, or even when I was on the school side in Atlanta, where really good questions could make a kid stand out. Like I've had cases I can specifically remember back at Westtown where some kids were so great in some of their questions that I would always stay around afterward and talk to the rep. And reps would ask me a little bit more, like, tell me about the kid that had like the Cowboys jersey on a little bit more. Like those kinds of things can happen. I don't want to make it sound like they always happen.
Yeah.
Or even they happen most of the time. And I did it as well when I was in admissions, and somebody really stood out to me. And then I'm meeting with the placement person. Tell me a little bit more about that kid. So they can be opportunities, but I don't want people to feel like it's this big pressure thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can you sort of strike some balance on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a couple of things. One, typically when there's a student who's going to stand out, their application is also going to
Sure.
stand out by itself,
Sure.
right? Those things sort of go together. And so it can be really fun and interesting to have a conversation with a student. But then usually, this isn't always the case, but usually then when I see their application, like I don't have to advocate for that student to be admitted. They're going to be admitted on their own. So not that that means that that conversation was a waste, just it wasn't really necessary for the student like getting in. And then sometimes there are, like, I can think of a student right now who I've now met 3 times, who I've had great conversations with, and it will help me to be able to advocate for that student in this process. So there are times when certainly it can be helpful. I think what I don't want is for students to feel, okay, so you don't watch TV, so this is not gonna resonate with you. But for any of our listeners,
I watch
who have
sports,
watched
investments, and politics. I watch
okay,
some things.
well, you don't watch.
I don't watch a lot of
fiction
movies.
TV. Yeah. So there's this series, this Mindy Kaling series called Never Have I Ever. And there's a student in the school in the series named Ben, who is like all gung ho about, I think it's Princeton, but I can't remember, but no, it's Columbia. And he takes every opportunity that he can to literally schmooze with the Columbia rep. And you can see in the show, and this is true to real life, how it just is not helpful for him. Yeah. And it's just like kind of annoying for the rep. And so anybody who's seen that will know who I'm talking about. And I've seen kids like that in real life, frankly, standing at the Columbia table, because I have to stand next to Columbia at fairs, and doing the same thing. And I'm always like, oh my God, it's Ben in real life. And you don't have to be that person, right? Like if you want to come and ask good questions because they're genuinely questions that you have about the college or university, and not because you're trying to be memorable. I think that's where I would just caution students, is that like, you don't have to be memorable, but if you have questions that are really legitimate questions, you may end up being memorable, and that's great. But like, don't try to be a character, right?
And you're right. Never heard of the show, but now I want to go seek it out because I like the example you gave me. But no, I was glad, because I wanted to come back to that when you said we don't always like that a lot either. It can feel fake. I was going to come back to that because I know exactly what you're talking about. And even sometimes with my own students now, sometimes I'll have someone say something like, yeah, we've attended the virtual session 3 times, and we signed up for this interview with this person and that person. And, I'm in the process of setting up a whole interview with someone. She's going to be great because she's a really good communicator. But the whole thing is on less is more. Less is more. And all of the times when people kind of try too hard and do too much, that it's not a good look and it doesn't necessarily help you. And this is like one of the many, many things that can fit in that category.
Yeah. Well, and we start to see patterns too. Like there's a school in my territory that is famous for like one day a month, the counselor clearly tells all the students, okay, today is the day that you need to write to your rep and the, top 10 colleges on your list. And so all of a sudden from 12 to 12:50, I get this flood of emails from
Wow.
students at the school introducing themselves and telling me about themselves. And like,
Yes.
it's just really obvious that
Yes.
this wasn't just happenstance that these students all wrote these emails at the same time. And I don't, like, I want to get to know students through their application, not because I'm spending time poring over emails from them. So I think it's a little bit of that feeling of like, it needs to be authentic. And when you come to a high school visit and you have good questions to ask because you are genuinely interested in the school, that does stand out. But it doesn't have to be like, I need to be memorable kind of situation.
And the other thing I'll add is you're at a small liberal arts school. I worked at a small residential boarding school that was even smaller. Like this, like for your big state schools and your larger schools like that, like it just is even less of a factor. It really, really is. Like to the extent to which people may remember you, it's in the smaller residential settings where they have less applicants and get to know them a little more. But when you talk about like national large universities, I mean, there's even schools out there that literally have processors that do some visiting, and they're not even doing anything to do with the file reading. So I want to be careful that people don't even to the extent that we're talking about how sometimes it can stand out, like be careful not to just extrapolate that to all types of schools as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
Thanks, Hillary.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Anonymous Mom.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we switch gears and just talk about a couple different topics related to testing. We start out, Jay gives the history of the evolution of the University of California from a system that required the SAT to one that doesn't require the test. Jay was involved in some of these conversations, and I thought our listeners would want to hear from someone who actually sat on two of the committees and was actively involved in these discussions. And then Jay and I turn our attention to his thoughts on the no-harm test score policy that's starting to spread to other schools. We define the no-harm test policy, and I ask his opinion. What does he think about no-harm test policy? Listen and enjoy. Let's wind down by talking about something you and I had an interesting conversation about in Los Angeles at NACAC last week. So I was mentioning to Jay, I visited the 5 UCs that get the most applications on my trip to California: UCLA, Berkeley, San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Irvine. And in talking with them, they feel that their test-free policy is working very well. They feel it's working very well. I missed something. I remember when the UCs went to this policy, and I remember them saying, okay, we're going to do this until 2025 and take a look at it. And then I remember them saying, maybe we'll come up with our own test. What I missed was the announcement that, no, we're test-free in perpetuity. And UCLA made that very clear to me when I was there. No, it's working really well for us. Everybody said it was going to be way too much work to try to come up with, create some new test. And it's working for us. And Gary Clark, who's the VP of Enrollment, was sharing with me the graduation, retention, all the data. It's working extremely well. Why would we move away from it? Another leader at another school indicated that I don't understand what's going on the East Coast, but this is working well for us. Jay, you happen to know some of the studies and data, and you were in the mix on all these conversations. And in talking with Jay at NACAC, he said some of this stuff goes 4 years back, and he's at liberty now to share some things he wouldn't have been able to share a year or two ago. So share what you can say about how the sausage got made and kind of how we got to where we were on that. I think some of our listeners might find that interesting.
Oh, wow. Okay. Where to start? So there are a couple of factors here: how it happened, and then how it's been playing out. Let me start with this: that there was a lawsuit filed in 2019. COVID starts in March of 2020. There was a lawsuit filed in 2019 alleging that the University of California's use of the SAT violated California's anti-discrimination laws because it unfairly discriminates against Blacks, Latinos, low-income kids, kids with disabilities, and that discrimination should not exist in a state program. And it was a lawsuit that had real potential for winning. And I think the University of California very smartly realized that they didn't want to defend their use of the SAT, not sure that they could effectively. And because of COVID, everyone else was going test optional anyway, as was the University of California right at the beginning, announcing we're test optional like everybody else because test administrations are being canceled. Kids can't take the test. And so the University of California proposed in May of 2020 that the university go 2 years test optional as a segue to the following 2 years test free. And those of us who were rooting for test free, which became a discussion point because the litigation, had the litigation prevailed, there wasn't a test optional. If the test's use violated California's anti-discrimination laws, it couldn't be used. The UC would have to go test free had the litigation prevailed. So partially as induced by the risk of the litigation, the UC administration proposed 2 years test optional, 2 years test free, and that there would be recommendations made for year 5. Now, back up a moment. Before the 2 years test optional, 2 years test free, the UC faculty did their own study and recommended that the SAT be kept for 9 years while the UC developed its own test. That was the faculty's recommendation. Now, and the faculty argued during a 5-hour meeting by the regents of the University of California, streamed, which I watched and I participated in because I did a public comment by telephone at that meeting. What I urged the regents to do was put me out of the test prep business, get rid of the test, go test free. And so the regents decided that 4-year plan over the faculty's recommendation, which was obviously very different. And the faculty wasn't concerned about the litigation. They were just doing their faculty thing, whereas the administration had to consider, well, we're facing this litigation, we may lose. So the 2 years test optional, 2 years test free, with recommendations to be made on year 5. I was appointed to the 2 committees that made recommendations for year 5. And very early on, remember, the faculty had said it would take 9 years to develop a new University of California test. We had discussions in one of our committees, and I actually was the most optimistic. Everyone else was saying, well, if the faculty says it's 9 years, it's probably 9 years. I actually looked at the faculty's work and thought that a new test could be developed in about 7 years. That wasn't fast enough because we needed something for year 5. And so we immediately on the committees dismissed the SAT and ACT because the system was already moving away from them. And the question was there another test that pre-existed? Because there wasn't enough time in 4 years to develop a new test. Was there another test that already existed that the University of California should consider implementing? one of the committees made recommendations directly to the UC president. And that recommendation, over my objection, I opposed this, was to consider smarter balance, not a recommendation to adopt smarter balance, but to consider smarter balance for year 5. That recommendation went to the regents, and the regents just said, no, we don't want to mess with another test. And that's when the implication was that unless something very, very unusual arises, the University of California is test-free as far as the eye can see. Now, with initial data being really good, and key to that was the University of California faculty board that makes recommendations on admissions. It's called BORS. It's an admissions advisory board. That faculty board had agreed with the general faculty Senate recommendation of 9 years with the SAT, and then develop 9 years maintaining the SAT and ACT as requirements, and then developing a new test. That board said that the results of the first year of the cohort that was admitted without a test being considered were good enough, comparable grade point in that freshman year to prior years. The results were good enough that the faculty said that they may have made a mistake in their prior recommendation, and that test-free showed great potential to continue both the excellence and diversity at the University of California. Now, that's only first-year data.
Sure.
But that points in the correct direction. And that's the kind of stuff that UCLA is looking at and Berkeley is looking at. And they're all happy with what's going on. There is no organized opposition to test-free at the University of California. There are individual voices now and again, nothing organized, and hasn't been for 4 years.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting conversation I had at NACAC with a leading educational writer who he's having some conversations with some places like MIT that went to required testing and saw their diversity numbers plummet. Now, that hasn't been the case everywhere. Some schools are still showing strong diversity numbers.
Right.
It's really mixed, but
Right.
some are really plummeting.
Right.
And he said he's picking up a little bit of a movement back against the test that he feels is picking up momentum. I'm noticing this do no harm policy is growing. You and I talked about that at NACAC. For those of you who don't know, both of our regulars on our podcast, Connecticut College and Colorado College, have a do no harm policy, meaning send us your scores, and if we will only count them if they help you, and so it takes all of the guesswork out. I got to spend some time with Heath Einstein at TCU, their VP of Enrollment, at the conference, talking with him about their do no harm policy. He brought up the fact that he literally saw there were 8 different test optional policies, and he's like, we can't do this. We can't have 8 different policies. This is too confusing. So they're very pleased with it. Denison has it, and I feel this is picking up momentum. So Jay, since you and I talked, and that was the last day of the conference? That was Saturday. I'm sitting here talking to you today on Thursday, 5 days later, right? Both U Chicago have announced a do no harm policy. And I don't know if this is a new announcement or it flew under the radar for me, but Texas A&M has now a do no harm policy. So I know you said you'd think about that. What are your thoughts on it? I don't know if you had a chance to think. I only gave you 5 days. And I know you probably want to look into it more, but what are your initial thoughts on that? Because I'll tell you, I like it.
Yeah. It's got an initial attraction because it gives students options. But I've been thinking about it a little bit. I want to think about it a little more. But my initial reaction, having thought about it only a little bit after you and I talked about it, is the underlying problem is that it motivates all the kids to take a test that causes unnecessary psychological damage to a lot of kids. And
but is it really a lot of psychological damage if you know that it can't hurt you?
Well, you still have a score.
Mm-hmm. So you're concerned, like it's kind of like the reasons why people don't share IQ. You
Exactly.
stigmatize, like I'm a 870 or whatever, and then you see yourself that way, and you feel it limits your potential. That,
yeah, and in thinking about what's good for students, is having measures of their academic achievement that aren't norm referenced. And so really the weight here, Mark, is whether the damage of having a norm reference number can be mitigated sufficiently by having it not play a role in admissions. Now, I'm not adverse to tests. I'm adverse to tests with high stakes use. And what you're telling me is do no harm. What you're implying is do no harm is not the kind of high stakes use that I have a problem with, because these schools are perfectly comfortable making a decision on that kid without the number. And so that appeals to me.
And I'll tell you another thing that appeals to me is I just see large swaths of the country that would never go for test-free, test-free, score-free, test-blind, pick your name. I know you like test-free. Different people use those terms interchangeably, and we talked about why you like the term you use. But I just say that because different people,
Sure.
I think it's clear that way when some people know it as test-blind. And so this, just so that we're talking about clarity. There's large swaths of the country just never going to go for it. But I could see some of those people settling on this. So that's why I think it has greater potential to have momentum that could grow. And I see how it's more appealing than both test mandatory and test optional. I think you would agree with that. You probably like it better than those two.
More than test mandatory and test optional, sure.
Yeah.
I like it better than those two.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps if one takes the position that test optional, not submitting a score, does you no disadvantage whatsoever, and you really believe that, and colleges really do that, and I believe that all of them try to do that. And I believe that most of them do that pretty well, some not so well, and therefore it doesn't work as ideally as it could. The issue then is, and again, you're motivating every kid because they perceive, well, there's no downside.
Sure.
You're motivating every kid to get that number, and I'm not. And now I'll have to think about.
Yeah, think about it some more. I'm quite bullish on it. Kind of excited about it as a student-centric approach, and I do really believe in the genuineness of the schools that I've talked to, that they are using it that way. I mean, all of this thing. One of the problems with test optional is a lot of people don't buy it. I'll use I've used this example in talking to my students.
Sure.
Somebody gets a job in a new law firm, and they're talking to a more senior lawyer in the firm, and they say, you want to know one of the great places about this place? It's casual dress. But then they say, but if you're a really good dresser, the partners will notice it. And now you're confused. Is it casual dress or not? And that's one of the challenges with test optional is
right.
People tend not to believe it.
That's a great example, Bob.
You like that one?
I'm going to steal it, and I'll credit you. But
you don't even have to credit me, but steal it and use it.
I will steal it.
I'm flattered that I gave you some content.
Yeah.
AJ, I can talk to you all day, and I'd love to talk to you some more, but I got a counseling call in 4 minutes of the New York family. I got to jump into.
Oh, please do.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being generous with us, both with Julie and I a few months ago. And again, this was a lot of fun. I think it can help a lot of people. And will you be in Columbus at NACAC next year?
I would say probably.
Well, I'll look forward to seeing you
Columbus
there.
isn't
as sexy as LA.
You said it, not me. You'll get the letters.
It's well, Columbus I can at least drive to.
Yeah.
It's all good. Awesome. All right. Take care. See you, my friend.
Be well. Thank you, Mark. Bye now.
Friends, there are two things Jay and I discussed off the air that I wanted to share with you. Jay and I discussed how important it is that a student has either completed Algebra 2 or is almost through Algebra 2 when they start their test prep. If they want to get a good ACT score or a good SAT score, they're going to have a good Algebra 2 foundation because both tests have many questions on them that require knowledge of Algebra 2. The other thing that Jay and I discussed was prepping for the SAT by reading widely and doing math problems. Now, Jay didn't mention this to you on the air, but this is exactly what he did. Whether you want to call it having no formal prep or you want to call it natural prep, but it works. And Jay used it. He got a very good SAT score, and I'm sure that was a positive factor in Jay's admission to a very elite college.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, hopefully you heard last week what Lynda and Lisa discussed, Colorado State University in Fort Collins. So now here, the final part 2 of 2.
Honors program. This requires a higher GPA, and you submit the application by February 1. To be a part of that honors program, they're really looking for your rigor in high school and community contributions. So what have you also done outside of the classroom? Once you're admitted to CSU, you're invited to apply, but you can also request an application through admissions. They'll have some short answer essays that you'll need to answer, and honors program decisions are made by March 31st. Some of the benefits for honors programs, and you know I love honors programs because they can really make a school feel smaller. You get honors advising, peer mentors. You have a residential learning community. You get special opportunities for research or study abroad, an additional academic advisor, priority registration, which at a big school can be a lifesaver. And then it also comes with a $1,000 per year scholarship. CSU is generous with AP credits. So they do accept a number of 3 scores, and you can use AP credits to satisfy core requirements. So it gives students an opportunity to place in higher level programs or even graduate earlier. I'm going to talk about some of their majors. They are really known for veterinary medicine, and so a lot of students go in with that thought, and environmental studies. Some of their interesting majors that you don't always hear about are environmental and natural resources economics, human dimensions of natural resources, restoration ecology, fermentation and food science, equine science, I can't talk this morning, livestock business management, and watershed science and sustainability. So a lot of really specific majors for natural resources and environmental studies. They do have some competitive majors, and they will review admission for the university first, and then they'll take a look at these majors. But they will require higher GPAs, and these are biomedical science, business, computer science, engineering, and journalism and media communication. One note about engineering, and they are looking for 4 years of mathematics, and statistics doesn't count. So they really want to see students get up to calculus. I know. And that comes up quite a bit. Should I take pre-calc or will stats count? And they tell you right up front, they'd rather see you do the pre-calc. They do have some accelerated programs where you might be able to graduate in 3.5 years. And those include business, econ, psychology, along with several others. They have strong career services where they help you with what you would expect, resumes, interviews, career fairs, helping with internships, and they also offer access to micro internships. So internship programs that last maybe just a week or so, but can help students get some targeted experience. Study abroad. And one of the things I like about their study abroad is they have recommended programs by college. So a lot of times engineers struggle to find study abroad opportunities because they're in such lockstep programs. But they have got a list of study abroad opportunities that may be appropriate for each college. With student orientation, students are required to take part in a 2-day on-campus event, or they do have a virtual option just to get everyone ready to begin. So let's talk about sports. It's my favorite thing. I know so much about this. They have a very cute official animal, Cam the Ram. They are, that's what I know, D1 Mountain West Conference, CU Boulder, biggest rival. I thought their football stadium was quite impressive. And their facilities for students are really beautiful. And they have, it's the biggest climbing wall that I have seen on a campus. And at their facility, you can, and I'm so sorry, I forgot what it's called and don't have it in my notes, but students can actually check out sporting equipment. So not just like, hey, I want a basketball for a pickup game, but if they want, snowshoes or camping equipment, and they want to go out and go hiking, they can get all of that there on campus. Lisa, I've been talking a lot. Any questions so far?
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like there's so much to recommend it, and there's some unique features of the school. But who do you think this school is a good fit for?
Well, let me tell you, I think that students here should be outdoorsy. I mean, this is a school that embraces its location, and not just the mountains, but the community, Fort Collins. This is a school that values the environment. This is a place for environmentally conscious students. I mean, I think if you walked across campus and started littering, you might get mugged. It's collaborative, community oriented. And again, while not overly diverse, I think it is a welcoming and inclusive campus. But I also think it's career focused. Students are here to, I think they're pragmatic. Let's get it done and move on. And I will say, I thought on that trip to Colorado, I saw 5 or 6 schools. We had the best bookstore.
Well,
I know. Love bookstores. It was big. We visited in Pride Month, and of all the campuses, they definitely embraced Pride Month more than any other. So I liked it. Let's talk about how to apply. So what they are looking for, they value the rigor and your GPA in your application the most. They will also consider recs and your personal statement essay as important. That's the only essay that's required. They do not consider demonstrated interest, and no interview is required. And I'm going to read this right from the website. It says, in general, students with a 3.0 GPA on a 4-point scale and a steady or upward trend in grades are admitted. So that gives you an idea. This is not a school that's strictly for straight A students. Their middle 50% GPA is 3.44 to a 4.08. They are test optional. As a matter of fact, again, right from the website, if you want your test scores to be reviewed, you need to email admissions asking them to consider. So their test scores don't carry a ton of weight. Early action deadline is November 15th. Regular decision is January 15th. And you'll usually get a decision within 4 weeks or so of application. After the RD date, apps are considered on a rolling basis. For scholarships, the deadline is March 1st, but they recommend you get things in by February 1. So cost of attendance for Colorado residents is just under $35,000. Out of state, it's right around $56,000, and that's all in. So tuition, room and board, books, travel, all of that. They do offer merit aid, and they have a grid on their website. Again, I love those. For out of state, starting with a GPA of about 3.3, you can get up to $4,000 a year, and the max is $12,500 a year. In state, the range is lower, $2,500 to $4,000. And then they have a scholarship portal that opens October 1st and closes March 1st. And I definitely encourage students to take a look at that. And Colorado residents can apply for free. And then the state of Colorado has free application days, and those are in October. And for this year, it's October 15th through the 17th, where anyone can apply for free. Otherwise, it's $50 to apply. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you happen to know what their graduation rates are. Like,
Yeah, it's right around 71%, which is, a big state school, higher than the national average. And because they take so many students, some students take a little longer to graduate. So it's, I always look at your own individual situation.
And how much the in-state, out-of-state balance? So how many kids come from Colorado and how many kids come from other places?
From Colorado and the rest from outside. And again, only about 2% international. So still primarily Colorado. I think it's a popular school in the West. So not a ton from the East Coast, but I think it's becoming more popular, just as I think all schools in Colorado are becoming more popular.
Yeah, and I'm sure as CU Boulder becomes increasingly selective, Colorado State seems like a pretty good option, and they have a lot of similar things, and they have great school spirit, big football, big sports school. So I can really see the appeal for kids.
Yeah, and CU Boulder, beautiful campus, and I think CU Boulder was the school that showed up most on students' lists for me last year. But Colorado State offers a ton, and I have students, once they get on campus, fall in love with it. It is a different vibe than CU Boulder. There's not a lot of Greek life here. It's probably less than 5% Greek life. So this just feels, I don't know, a very welcoming place. And I know I keep coming back to that. I just felt like, oh, I'm home, kind of feel at Colorado State. Yeah.
I do think you're going to probably retire someplace in Colorado then. It's calling you. So,
I'm not. I'm not. My husband might, but I'm not. No. It's lovely, and I would visit every single year. But all of that snow and the cold, can't do it. Sorry, Colorado. I love you though.
yeah, that's the one hang up. So you have to like snow if you're going to go to Colorado State because you're going to get a lot of it
I don't.
probably.
So
Yeah, no, I think it's, one of the nice things about a school about Colorado State is it can meet a lot of students' needs because it's pretty well rounded. It can take a variety of students. They do offer merit aid even for out of state. So, I know for when I lived in Illinois, kids could go to Colorado State for about the same as they could the University of Illinois in terms of cost. So, it just seems like it has a lot to recommend it.
And when we were there, we walked to a Korean restaurant that was no more than a 10-minute walk from campus that had come highly recommended. And small place, wonderful food. And there were 3 visiting grad students there who were doing research, and they were all from Princeton. So there's like real academics happening here. This is not just a big party school, and I wouldn't even call it a party school in that traditional sense. There is so much to like about this school. One of my favorite schools that I visited this summer, definitely.
Well, I can see why. I hope that more people take a look at it because I think like schools in the West and the Midwest sometimes, especially people from the East Coast, feel like that's just those parts of the country don't exist. But they do, and they have so many great educational opportunities for you if you are willing to, consider them. So I hope people will put Colorado State on the radar.
So too, Lisa, thanks for taking the time this morning.
Oh, always a pleasure.
Bye.
Friends, on Monday's episode, there was a lot of talk at NACAC about how counselor recommendations and teacher recs are changing. So over the next 2 Mondays, I'm going to share with you how some schools are changing their expectations and requirements when it comes to the counselor recommendation and teacher recommendations. And after that, we'll hear part 3 or 4 of my interview with David Hawkins. And we turn our attention to the survey they did with high school students, 1,000 high school students. They teamed up with the Harris Poll professional folks to look at what are the biggest factors that high school students think influences admission decisions. And they interviewed them on a range of other issues. It's a fascinating interview. I think you're really going to enjoy it. We'll be there for part 3 and part 4, looking at the high school survey and also comparing and contrasting it with what college admission officers say matters the most in the college admission process. Friends, when I was at NACAC, I got a chance to spend time with one of the giants in the profession, Heath Einstein, VP of Enrollment at TCU. Our regular listeners know that Julie and I interviewed Heath on this podcast, and it was really actually one of my favorite interviews. And in talking with Heath, he's committed to come back on again, but I'll be doing that interview over the summer. And, a lot of times when I do an interview with a thought leader, I like to ask them at the end, what's your advice for students and for parents and for college counselors? And there are a couple that stand out as my favorites. And it's Chris Gruber from Davidson College and Heath Einstein from TCU. And I think what they said is so profound and it inspires me that I like to play it a couple times a year. So I close you out with words of wisdom from Heath Einstein, VP of Enrollment at TCU. All right. And the last question is your best advice for 3 groups of people: students, parents, college counselors.
My best advice to students is, as you consider where you will go to college, imagine yourself as a rubber band, and you want to go somewhere that is going to stretch you, perhaps to places that you didn't expect to be stretched, but not to the point where you break.
Ooh.
My advice to parents is that you have only one job in this process, and that is to love your child.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, if your feelings toward your child have anything to do with the bumper sticker that's going on in the car, then you may cause irreparable harm to that relationship. So just remember to love your children and to tell them that you love them. And to counselors, my advice is have enough wine for the whole year, because you're probably gonna need it.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.